We are on day 2 of our Place SLR Advisory Workshop, and we are working to bring partners from across the science, stewardship, and management continuum in the Northern Gulf around sea level rise. And today we're going to work on needs and gaps and do some prioritization for needs and gaps so that we can create a 2021 to 2023 work plan out of that. So Renee, take it away.
Thanks, Todd. Good morning, everybody. Thanks again for all the great stuff yesterday and for being here today, nice and early. We got a lot of good stuff planned. Just as a reminder, what we're here to accomplish and what we've already accomplished, we now understand, thanks to yesterday, what Place SLR is. And we have increased our awareness of sea level rise resources, both what's out there and maybe what we wish we had. Then yesterday, we started identifying and prioritizing our gaps and needs. And then later today, we're going to develop activities to help address priority gaps and needs. And then, of course, always and continually, I don't know if this ever gets a check mark, we're going to be working on building collaborations and networks. Just a few best practices to help us as we work on these objectives to meet our overall goals. Please turn away from distractions, and we're halfway through this. Today is particularly important because we're going to be asking a lot of input from the people participating in the workshop to help shape the next few years. So paying attention is key to that, but also be flexible. We're all doing this where we can from where we can. So if you get disconnected, just try and reconnect, be patient with yourself if you have technology issues. And I should have said this yesterday, but Sonia Vedral is our technology host. So if you run into problems, go to Sonia first. She's gonna be monitoring the chat. Please remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking. We got a lot of people here. We don't want a lot of background noise. Please use the chat window or raise your hand feature if you want to ask a question or make a comment. And then we also have a tool we're using called Elmo, which is enough, let's move on. So we're like calling the question in Robert's Rules of Order if you feel like we're getting stuck somewhere and not making forward progress. But to complement that, we have a marina, kind of like a parking lot. If something comes up that we want to revisit, we have our marina that we're keeping up with so that we can come back to issues and continue to discuss them. We already have one thing there. So if we have time at the end, we can talk about it. And last, but certainly not least, participation. Like I said, today is really participation heavy. We're going to be thinking about what actions we can take. We'll be talking about priorities. And this really requires people here to get involved and speak up. To make sure you know how to do that, whenever you're not speaking up, make sure to mute your line. You can see the mute button down there on the right, on the left, I mean. And then you can also use the chat box to ask questions. And if you want to raise your hand, you go to reactions, and you see here all these other reactions are temporary. They'll fade after a minute. But if you raise your hand, that'll stay up until you put it back down. So how are we going to accomplish these objectives today? We're going to recap what we did yesterday. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, or for those who, you know, like me, did other things and kind of forgot what we did, we'll go back over it again. We're going to do what I'm calling like a warm-up icebreaker. This is still about getting to know each other, but also about starting to explore and get our brains into action around the rest of the activities for the day. Then we're going to really dig into that document I shared yesterday on the gaps and needs, review some of the big ones, and then also start to think about what is it that's not there. And then we'll also vote. After we vote, we'll go into a break. We'll get some things organized. And when we come back, we're going to work on identifying actions that can be taken to close the priority gaps and needs. These are actions that we can be working on over the next 2 years. Then we're going to spend just a little bit of time as we wrap up looking at those actions, thinking about communication. How can we make sure as we move forward that information is flowing well? And then take some time, this was explicitly asked that we put some time aside to talk about proactive policies and other types of catalyst conversations, right? And we heard some of those things and some of those themes, I think, come up yesterday in the case studies. So we'll have some time to think kind of big picture beyond specific gaps or needs that we can close with individual actions. And then finally, we'll do a little bit of reflection, wrap up, and adjourn. So today we have many of the same facilitators helping us out. You'll see these faces throughout the day. And again, remember, Sonia is our technology host. So if something isn't working, start with her. All right, so what did we do yesterday? Well, the first thing is we learned about place. We understood that this is a network of individuals working across the science to stewardship spectrum on sea level rise resilience. We also explored existing tools and resources that are available for the place network to work on sea level rise resilience. In those conversations, a few things that were already identified in that Padlet, for example, afterwards when we were reflecting, was the lack of compound flooding tools, the need to think about connecting infrastructure regulators with the science. A broader extent and depth of models needs to be presented. There's a couple of like marsh models, for example, that cover the region that weren't brought up yesterday. We need to also update some of those models. There's a Gulf-wide SLAM run, but it's a little bit dated, so it's time to start working on that. And then also another gap was the lack of tools that showcase the changes in water level during a storm. And then there was a lot of interest in things that people really focus on around the social vulnerability topics. We also had some amazing case studies. I tried to capture it all in just one slide, so it's kind of tiny writing, but in a nutshell, what we saw was there was a lot of successes that are already happening across the region. We explicitly heard about just being able to have the conversation and to keep having a mechanism for having the conversation was really important. People were gaining additional information, the vulnerability analyses, some of those white papers that we heard about, integrating information into the regulations, codes, and sort of practices of how stuff is done was also another success that was noted. Updating infrastructure to be more resilient was also something that's been accomplished, and then making the most of opportunities. It's unfortunate, but sometimes when there's a challenge or a problem, it also can be an opportunity to get some things done. And so we heard about some successes of that being capitalized on. We also heard about some challenges. For example, the funding itself often comes with limitations on the scope or the timing. The timing was also noted as a challenge in of itself, got to do these things quickly. So a suggestion was to make sure you do that prep work ahead of time. Go ahead and get a handle on what data you have and those kinds of things. We also heard about the implementations of the policies themselves. It's a great success to get those best practices into regulations and codes, but there's these challenges for developers where that traditional infrastructure meets the conservation, and the green infrastructure stuff. And so there needs to be some work done there. And maybe something that could help that is that there's sort of a lack of consistency at the state level, which can be sort of a roadblock for local efforts. And then another challenge that was pointed out, which I think we all kind of live with this at different scales, were the limitations around silos and how silos can get in the way sometimes of productive collaboration. And so for next steps, some exciting things we heard coming. Groundwater was pointed out as a place that needs to happen next. We've got Ocean Springs was doing a watershed study, so that'll be really informative. We also heard about the need to expand the available information. Pensacola is already working on updating and expanding their vulnerability assessment and also integrating social vulnerability into that. And the JCUA's next steps are really looking to continue expanding their infrastructure into parts of the county that are more resilient naturally. And then when doing so, using infrastructure materials and design that's more resilient. So we heard a lot of great stuff yesterday to really set up the conversation today. The other thing that happened, and I keep talking about this because it makes me happy, is the happiness wall. When we meet in person, we get to have a beer or have some coffee and talk to each other, have some food and share all the good things in our lives. And I think given the past 20 months, we needed it. So I was really happy looking at the wall this morning. It's in the chat because I keep talking about it. But again, throughout the day, we're not going to have time to work on this explicitly, but you can go there and get a boost maybe during the break. All right, so with that, we're going to transition into the mental warm-up. Before I do though, were there any questions about yesterday? Any recaps or anything about that people wanted to touch on? And remember, you can raise your hand or put something in the chat. All right. So for our mental warm-up, we're going to have 4 questions that we can talk about. The plan is not to talk through all 4 of these. We're not jumping feet first into activities. This is just to kind of get our minds going. We're not going to really take a bunch of notes or report out or anything. It's just to start a dialogue and get to know the people in your breakout groups when you're talking about your own challenges and opportunities that may be there to help connect with each other. So we want you thinking about what kind of challenges you've faced in the past 6 months to a year. What kind of decisions are you making now that could be impacted by sea level rise? Chase talked about that a lot yesterday, how decisions you make today, will be important for the next 50 years. And he even talked about how decisions he made 10 years ago, unfortunately, he won't be able to go back and change those. Another thing is, what information do you need to help make these decisions better? And if you had a magic wand, other than money, what's one helpful thing to assist you with sea level rise? And what would that be? So Sonia's going to send us to breakout groups. We're going to spend about 10-15 minutes chatting. Again, this is not meant to be a rigorous exercise where we capture everything. We're just trying to get our minds going, thinking about those gaps and needs, because when we come back, we will start with the heavy load of really writing these things down and capturing them in terms of where the place should go next. All right, take us away, Son, another. But I'm glad that sounds like the warm-up went well. People were starting to get into that mindset. So now that you're there, what we're going to do is get into reviewing these gaps and needs. So I'm going to encourage all of you once again to get out this piece of paper. We're going to be using this from now until the break. And so I wanted to just walk through the gaps and needs. I'm assuming you all did your homework diligently, but just as a refresher, we'll touch back on the things we saw here. I'm not going to read every single one of these to you, but I am going to highlight some of the things where we've made progress, and I'm going to highlight some of the things where we have not made as much progress, particularly on things that we had previously prioritized. So for the set tables, I feel like that's really going well. It's essentially just been maintained. It was just updated. Information that's available about how marshes are doing from an elevation perspective is well documented, I think, as well as something like that can be for the Gulf. And that is a Gulf-wide effort. The work on LIDAR data. So there's been a lot of work in our region on how to adjust data collected via LIDAR on elevation in marshes, because as we know, the LIDAR is not quite as accurate as we would like it to be. And so Stephen Medeiros has been doing a lot of adjustments. And one thing that is coming out is an adjusted DEM for the marshes for the entire Big Bend region in Florida to complement some that exists already in Mississippi along the coast. It'll be in the Pascagoula River Delta and then over there by the Grand Bay Preserve. And then also we have some data around Weeks Bay. And that methodology, in addition to the data sets themselves, are available. And it's documented how to do that. In terms of the ensemble of models, we talked about that yesterday. There's quite a few there, but I do think we heard some new models that we'd like added to this suite, particularly around compound flooding. The interactive effects of hurricanes and sea level rise on habitat loss and inundation. A lot of work has been done through the EASLR program in this region specifically to understand those relationships over time. And then here we've got some red, height modernization at local managed lands. I just don't know that a lot of progress has been made there, but if somebody knows of things that have happened, please speak up. We just haven't seen a lot of that moving forward. We have seen this platform come to fruition that GOMA put together on data and monitoring. So it's kind of like a Gulf tree, if you will, where you can search through existing data sets and you can narrow by parameters you're specifically interested in. It's actually a very handy tool. We did talk about the saltwater intrusion yesterday, that this maybe should be yellow now. We do have a good summary of the information that exists out there, but we were not able, between the pandemic and everything else, to really move this particular priority forward other than that synthesis of information. So I think something we might want to consider is this still a big need? Is there any expansion or scoping on that based on what y'all saw in that document that Sarah put together? In terms of using a consistent set of sea level rise projections, so in some ways this is green because we have the NOAA projections. We just heard Tina and Josh both talk about having them and using them. So I think in general there's agreement that we should be using those scenarios. And then there's work happening right now through GOMA on if there should be at all, maybe a Gulf-wide scenario for people to use if they're doing, say, a slam run for the entire Gulf of Mexico or things like that. For land acquisition and habitat restoration, making sure that these kinds of things are considering sea level rise. There is a lot of green here because, for example, Mike Oslin, the project he worked on with the tidal saline wetlands migration model that looks at where land use may change that could interfere with potential migration pathways. There's also TNC's Open Spaces project, the EASLR project using the hydro-MEM. There's a lot of things there that help and guide that, not to mention the entire SCA tool that's being developed on how to prioritize land acquisitions to maximize some of these ideas. So on page 2, so you're following along, now we're on page 2. Some maps that, like, for example, that talk about the likelihood of habitat migration and coastal inundation. Lots of those. We've got SLAM, we've got hydro-MEM, we've got storm surge maps, we've got quite a lot there. Improved outreach and communication of sea level rise science and issues. You can see here it was a priority a couple years in a row, and then it hasn't been since then. And I think that represents the progress that we've really seen since the cooperative and Now Place have been around. The videos that Michaela helped put together, we have those 2-pagers. We have a lot of things now to help support that, many of which you saw yesterday. So that's why that's been green. Over here on this side, the green on like local and regional narratives for impacts being felt, it's green because we are starting to and continue to capture those stories and elevate them and tell them when and where we can. I think that we're still missing when it happens, because sometimes it's hard to recognize that it's from sea level rise, but I think these kinds of stories are definitely gaining prominence. We're seeing them more in the media too. So there's help outside of our group for that one. And then improving the communications between management and researchers. I feel like that's happening through Place itself, along with, there's groups like Eric Stark's MTAG from Mississippi and Alabama, and other examples of networks in Florida. And then recommendations for how to use available information, particularly thinking about uncertainty and limitations. Again, things like we did yesterday, talking through how to handle the uncertainty of sea level rise itself and how to make decisions around that. Not to mention all of the trainings that we do to help people understand the limitations on tools whenever they ask for in-depth trainings on different types of tools, what they're good for, what they're not. We also try and keep that information in Gulftree. So if you look at any tool in Gulftree, it helps you understand the limitations associated with it. So we have some red here. Understanding the questions driving infrastructure placement. We just had some conversations about that in our warm-up about how you know, it's hard to know all the things that go into this and when it even makes sense to get involved. So I think some progress on developing almost like guidance or a framework on when it makes sense to integrate sea level rise science into this. And then a handbook on how to adapt cultural resources. I think we did actually take a big step forward with this, with Apalachicola had a project. We saw the video diary yesterday working on how to adapt historic buildings. But that, I think, has still maybe lagged a little bit. And then on page 3, there are just a couple. Now on your page 3, there's blanks because I'm about to ask y'all to add some. But at the top, there's just a couple more there. On the cost-benefit analysis, which we're doing quite a lot of that, but I don't think it's quite green yet because it's not like a standard easy thing to just do. So I'm going to stop talking now. That was a lot. On reflection, what's missing? What do you think we could add? What do you think we could take away? Or is there any stuff, any work that's happening towards these gaps that we're missing?
This is Brent. I think maybe one thing I didn't see on here, but maybe it is the about like innovative tools and kind of how to implement them for, you know, for local agencies. So you have, you know, kind of what we talked about, like the WADs, but you also have like, you know, backflow preventers and some of those things. It's not always easy to kind of switch gears and change into that. So how best to, you know, maybe having a toolbox or some guidance on how to implement those tools.
So I agree. It would be helpful if we had some type of not necessarily best practices, beyond best practices, some innovative approaches that the engineers, we could direct the engineers to look at for living shoreline design or road stabilization, coastal road stabilization or protection design.
Let me ask the group, is this just for like road stabilization? Y'all gonna see how bad I am at spelling. Or is it other types of infrastructure as well?
Oh, it could be, in my book, it could be any type of coastal infrastructure on the coast.
So maybe it's innovative.
But I'm not an engineer, so.
So maybe Renee, I have a comment on that.
Yeah.
I am probably one of very few engineers here, but I do have a project from FDOT actually to develop some of these innovative planning methods for dealing with what we call non-stationarity in climate change. But my point here, I think, is for all these projects, and I know you have an item on uncertainty. I think we need to promote this concept of dynamic adaptive pathways through place, kind of provide some kind of standard for in practice or something along those lines. We talk about it, but the decision makers need guidance how to implement that concept. I don't know how, maybe there's a way to phrase that. I think emphasize that as you have an item in there for something similar to deal with uncertainty, but this whole concept of dynamic pathways, I think, is something that is useful for everybody, not only for engineering work, other work as well.
So,
it could be
okay,
transportation sector, water sector, it could be any sector.
So I have guidance on applying dynamic adaptive pathways in community planning and resilience efforts. Is that all encompassing enough?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, and I think that is separate because there's two things at play here between what Brent and Tina were talking about, which is like, what are the innovative approaches? How can we get that move forward versus this idea of how do we help communities think of the big picture and think about the adaptive pathway, and how do we go back and assess and change things as we're going, or advance, or I guess accelerate the actions we're taking as needed. Yeah, for sure. Because I like you actually do really like the idea of dynamic adaptive pathways.
And one more thing, since I have I've started providing an idea here. Another idea I was thinking, there's a lot of communities in the region, whether it's Gulf or Florida, and every community has their own resiliency planning. And I mentioned that in our chat earlier, there is no what I call scale integration. In other words, I wonder if there's enough consistency checks across scales regionally to make sure when a regional government plans something that is consistent with what is the communities are planning. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. That's, for example, there's not even a discussion sometimes, I think. I mean, I'm going to have this resiliency project here, but does that assume that somebody else on a regional scale is going to do something that will affect my performance of my project? So I call that scale integration. I don't know if that's the right term, but I assume you follow what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what the right word here is, but don't negatively.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to put scale integration because I don't know that we'd know what it meant for a few months from now, and if we're looking at this and you're not here, but I just put integration across state, regional, and local levels on resilience planning. And how about related ordinances, etc., standards? Because I feel like that reflects what we heard from Cynthia and from Carolyn and from Chase. And I know y'all are here, so if I'm missing it, Carolyn or Cynthia, holler.
Yeah, no, you're on. I think one word you might want to insert somewhere in one of these items that you've been talking about is just coordination. And we talked about doing things in silos. That's part of the problem, is we don't always know, but the county or even neighboring cities are trying to wrestle with course, we're still on the level where resiliency and resiliency planning is not in our everyday speech yet. I mean, we just got to get there first. But so many of our problems that we're trying to tackle with standard methods maybe could be more effectively worked on if you pulled back from a regional and more adaptive scenario, but we're just not having that conversation.
So this may be like becoming the world's biggest problem, but what I've got it as now is integration and coordination both across and within state, regional, and local levels on resilience planning efforts and related ordinances and standards. And so I think that kind of brings it all together. Because Cynthia, I remember you talking about the silos that you were finding even within your city. And so that's why I said across and within.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is making me think too, while we're having this discussion about, I can see the need for us in the city to maybe start having some meetings on a regular basis on this, on resilience, bringing engineering, public works, and planning together, maybe someone from finance, and really starting to have either quarterly or some type of meeting where we just get together, maybe 30 minutes and an hour, have an ongoing agenda and start keeping this a little more mainstream. Just share, I could share what I've learned from these meetings with individuals now. That would just be helpful in and of its own.
And it was also great too to have, I think, the fire chief there whenever we had those conversations, and the city of Mobile had their police chief was there along with their finance director when they had their first resilience conversation. And the finance person was like, this just makes sense financially.
Yeah, that lunch and learn that we had was outstanding. So if we could do something like that on a regular basis, maybe not that big of a crowd and not always, necessarily the lunch, but maybe make that group a little smaller. That would help break down our silos at the city of Pensacola, at least. Would be a good start. So I might think about trying to get that in motion. No one wants another meeting, I know, but maybe some type of quarterly resiliency group within the city would be ideal.
Yeah, definitely.
And we'll invite
Heidi,
you. We
Heidi,
can once a year.
Yeah. Heidi, I see you got your hand up.
Thanks, Renee. And I was really glad that you mentioned the fire chief, because that relates directly to what I was going to share, which is I think there's a real need to connect with the emergency management side of things. And I'm really mindful of the large mitigation dollars that are starting to flow, right? Via both the BRIC program as well as existing funding hazard mitigation grant program. I think collectively this year between BRIC and HMGP, there's going to be over $4 billion. And so I think there's a real opportunity to harness some of that to do mitigation projects, but we have to be having the conversation with emergency managers and getting them to be at the table.
So I included that as a note under this integration and coordination. And so if that becomes one of our top priorities, when we go into our breakout groups, I think this could be a really good vein to dig into on specific actions that could be taken. So Karen, I'll come to you next. So there are some things in the chat that I got. So there's a comment about saltwater intrusion data and modeling for community infrastructure. And so I'm wondering if this one could maybe just be slightly tweaked to say, need for community infrastructure too. So it's not just on habitat and the data and modeling to support it. Because I think the saltwater intrusion in general is just kind of a gap, at least for the Northern Gulf. Yeah. I know you're doing better than that in the South Florida region. And then there was
I'm glad you added modeling in there, because that's a big deal, I think.
Yeah, because we've got monitoring and research. So I think it needs to be monitoring, research, and modeling.
Yeah.
Another comment that I got real quickly is stock language for scopes of work on infrastructure design, planning, and construction. So it's like language to help integrate these concepts when you're hiring consultants. So I'm going to work on that, because I don't think we have anything that applies to yet. And then Karen, if you'll go, and then Tina, and then we may have to wrap up the discussion. So Karen, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I really like what Heidi said about funding, and I think related to funding, and I see on here cost benefit analysis and also the RTK, like all of those are tied together with the need for first floor elevation, because if you're doing a funding application or trying to find something that's cost effective, it's not enough to have the elevation of the ground, right? Because any type of asset or structure, like FFE, the first floor elevation is the height of like the base of the door, right, above the ground. And that's such a critical data set that a lot of my projects right now are using drones, RTK, or just other innovative methods to really understand the risk. Like ground elevation is not going to give you that, right? We know that. So I don't know, it's like connected to some of the things you say, but I think you should say, yeah, FFE, like accurate, because right now the accuracy of the FFE data sets is horrendous. There's some really amazing tools. Like, I don't know if you've seen the one at LSU. I'll put it in the chat. It's really cool. And it connects it to like funding and policy and how you can change, like elevate homes for existing or planned construction and how that makes it more cost effective. So I don't know. Yeah, FFE is going to be a big deal coming up. So
Yeah,
if anybody wants information, it's like I've been working on it for a year now.
Yeah, we've been working on a project that we funded through NOAA, a small grant, where they did that through a new sort of low-cost innovative approach that Hal Needham has put together.
Hal, yes, I'm working with him too.
Yeah, so that's definitely, there'd be some progress there in expanding that.
Yeah, the Galveston project was really cool too that he did. Exactly. So like similar to that, but even those accuracies are not helping. Like we're trying to get within half a foot vertical accuracy.
Yeah.
I'll find
so less than half a foot. I'm going to make that note. And then Tina.
So I wanted to echo Heidi's comment regarding engaging with EMA and just give you an example. So resiliency planning is not mandated in Alabama. We're not doing, but we do have hazard mitigation grant program plans so that we can be eligible for those HMGP dollars. And within the next week or so, our EMA has organized a meeting of the HMGP planning committee to define our priorities and come up with projects for the COVID HMGP. So that's ongoing right now. And it is important to engage with emergency management. Back to the saltwater question. So just recently, I actually was talking to a board member of a local water utility expressing concern about drinking water and saltwater intrusion in aquifers along the coast. So I think I hear that need from them as well. How to, so community infrastructure is drinking water.
Yeah. And we actually heard that come up on Dauphin Island as well.
Yeah, that's who I'm talking about.
Okay, so we are going to need to go ahead and start prioritizing. Unless there's any last minute burning gaps or needs you just don't see here.
I do have one question, I think, real quickly. I'll make it quick. Is that item on septic tank issues as the groundwater table is rising and how that might impact sensitive water bodies? I mean, this is a big issue in South Florida, so I'm saying, that should be prioritized in my mind.
So is that a separate one, or does that fit under any of the other infrastructure, like infrastructure placement is red somewhere?
That requires monitoring and modeling as well, I think.
Okay. So I'm going to edit this one because I think it's a little vague. I think what we're going to do is rename this one. Monitoring, modeling, and research to understand impacts of infrastructure placement and potential. How about that?
Yeah, is that when you say infrastructure, I assume it's clear to people that includes many things, including septic systems. Okay.
I can't spell, so y'all have to work with that part. Okay, so
Yeah, I
what we're gonna-
also have a note on the chat talk about land use zoning and planning. So means that especially in Florida, there's still lots of new development going on to places that it should not be. But we have not, changed the zoning and the zoning code for a while. That's something that we also need to be to re-examine the efficacy of the zoning as well as building code to adapt to the new environment.
So is that separate thing, or does that actually go with this infrastructure one?
I don't know. This is more focused on land use, zoning and legal issues.
Okay. So let me see here. Zoning and land use updates to consider changes in suitability. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna call it because we have got to keep moving. Oh, I got Tina and Carolyn. We may have to do voting during our break, but we will adapt and move on. So Tina, what were you gonna say?
Sorry, I just didn't lower my hand.
Oh, okay.
So I lowered it now.
Okay. And then Carolyn, what you got?
No, I was just gonna kind of add on to the land use and zoning, looking at that from if it is, whether or not you can develop there is one thing, but if you are, if there was some guidance from a state or from some other entity that said, if you are developing in this certain area, you have to do it a different way. Maybe we can't get everyone to follow some different standards, but at least in those areas that are more sensitive, some guidance to say, this is how you have to do your water sewer. You can't have septic, things like that, based on the level of sensitivity, the level of infiltration or vulnerability. Getting some guidance from that so that it'll help us, it'll help the local level to update our codes and influence development.
So I think that connects back to what that first one was about.
It's kind of all
Yeah.
linked, but instead of saying, no, you can't develop here because it's sensitive, some areas you might have to say that it's not developable, but then we get into property rights. But even if you do develop, you're going to have to do it to this higher standard, not too different from velocity zones and how you have to construct differently. If that same thing was done for the infrastructure on a wider level.
Nice.
What
All
that
right,
would look like.
Sorry, Armando, go ahead.
Hi, and by the way, I'm speaking on behalf of Hank Huddy from Pinellas County. He shared two things. So a data need would be saltwater intrusion data and modeling for community infrastructure.
Yeah, I got that one, and the other one you sent about scopes of work.
Yeah, so like stock language for scopes of work, services for infrastructure, planning, construction. It's just to help us work with engineering firms and consultants when building capital projects.
Yep, I got that one right there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so this was a phenomenal discussion. First of all, thank you all so much for being so engaged. I know that it's easy to drift out in these kind of virtual conversations. So this was incredible. Now you have the hard part. We're going to go into break. And so what we're going to do is, I'm not going to let you vote yet. You have to go to your sheet of paper. I'm going to show you these extras so you can write them in if one of them speaks to you on your page number 3. But on your piece of paper, I want you to pick 3. You only get 3 that you want to vote for to be a priority for the next 2 years. Not forever, just for the next 2 years. Once you have done that, I want you to chat done. And then one of our many facilitators will send you the link to that Padlet so you can go and vote. And you just find your 3 and click the heart. So mark it on your paper first, what your 3 are. Once you know what your 3 are, chat done, and we'll send you the link to go vote. Thanks, everybody. It is helpful when I can see your faces, because sometimes I do worry I'm just speaking to the void. So that was awesome. I'm very excited. We have our top, we're going to say 3, but what we're going to do is we actually are going to lump the 2 yellow ones that tied, because they're both about economics, right? And digging into different versions of that. So we're going to tackle those together. And then we have guidance on designing and implementing innovative coastal infrastructure for sea level rise resilience, for those approaches for engineers. And then this idea of integration and coordination across and within state, regional, and local levels on resilience planning and related efforts. I'm really glad that one came to the top, because there seemed to be a lot of discussion there. And I think we can come up with some really creative ideas on how to tackle that. So that's what the next step is. We're going to have 3 breakout groups. And in your breakout group, you're going to circle through or cycle through each of those priorities one at a time. When you're focusing on a priority, what you're thinking about, what we're trying to capture are what's happening already in this space that we can leverage. And then, oh, that says cooperative. It's supposed to say place. I totally slipped into old names, sorry. But what are ongoing activities and things that we can leverage right now? And then what are some specific activities that we need to be accomplishing as a network, as the staff, as the implementation committee to move forward on that priority? So you're going to go in your breakout groups. We're going to spend about 15 minutes on each one, but we'll be talking, the facilitators will be talking to each other. So if we need to speed it up or slow it down, we can. But yeah, so that's how it's going to work. You're going to get sent to your breakout groups, and you're going to handle each priority one at a time. And your facilitator is going to walk you through that and how we're going to do that. There'll be a Padlet link they'll share with you. So at first you can start dropping ideas in. They'll help, the facilitator will help you sort of coalesce those into kind of some sort of organization. And then we'll come back together and, all right. We got a few more people coming in, or wait, is everybody back? I think everybody's back. Okay. Thanks everybody for coming back and for all of the work you just did. That was awesome. I was able to pop in on some of the different conversations and sound like there's a lot of good things being put forward. So everybody can hear kind of what happened after you left the priority you started with. We're going to take just a few minutes and kind of report out. So we'll start with priority 1.
Thank you, Renee. And I think this was a really interesting priority because we continue to have more and more added to it. So this is going to be a little bit of a challenge. Feel free to cut me off if I go too far. I'm going to try not to. So as a reminder for everyone, priority 1 is the guidance on designing and implementing innovative coastal infrastructure, sea level rise resilience approaches, specifically for engineers. And so we had a lot of different thoughts coming through on all of the different groups. We started with things like a white paper clearinghouse, and maybe it would be helpful to do translation type products or one-pagers, but trying to really come up with something that would be overall helpful. And so we've thought of then in additional groups, we had the idea of really integrating more with GOMA, for instance, sharing lessons learned with Southeast Florida Climate Compact, who has been doing a lot of work on this related to engineers and their needs related to sea level rise resilience. And so trying to kind of sharing these lessons learned and thinking of potentially expanding our reach through partnerships, depending on what we want these products to look like in the end. We've also thought of a lot of different specifics, whether it be shoreline vegetation, thin layer placement, very specific techniques that engineers are looking for continued guidance on, as well as the background information of sea level rise and carbon model that would be potentially helpful for them to know. So we thought of a lot of different information that should be in these resources. And then we had a few additional ideas for guidelines that these could be incorporated into, or potentially existing manuals that may exist for engineers that we could somehow integrate things with. And then honestly, it sounds like a lot of us feel like we just don't know very much about engineers' specific needs, and that we wanted to really have some specific conversations, you know, really small group focus groups to figure out what we could produce that would be helpful and not just another thing for them. So I'm going to stop there, but there was a lot from this.
That's awesome. That sounds like so much great information. And I always love the suggestion of going to the people we want to use it to ask them the best way to get it to them. That seems like a good way to avoid making just another thing. Awesome. All right. Priority 2.
Hi. So, sorry, I was getting a call I had to decline. So priority 2 was integration and coordination across and within state, regional, and local levels on resilience planning efforts and related ordinances, standards, etc. So just like Michaela, y'all said, y'all gave lots of good information for this priority. We had some information that's already out there that we can build on. One thing that had some decent discussion around it was a new version of Coastal Resilience Index that's coming out. There was also some places that are doing activities that could be furthered or could serve as good models for other places. We talked a lot about these regional climate action plans in Florida, and they sound like really effective, and that we could take lessons learned from them and other sorts of information that might be useful to expand it in Florida, or maybe to serve as a model elsewhere. But generally, a lot of the comments centered around bringing groups together or bringing information to groups that would be useful to help with this integration, I would say. But yeah.
Sorry, I've been off mute all day and I keep trying to talk and I have to go unmute. Thank you, Sarah. That sounds great. And I like the idea of leveraging examples of what's already worked successfully for regional collaborations and how to expand that. I think that's a great idea. Okay, and so then priority 3.
All right, last but not least, so this was kind of our overarching socioeconomic priorities. So looking at cost benefit analyses and then also economic valuations. And so kind of a large chunk of what we had on our Padlet was just existing tools and resources that will kind of come in handy for these types of analyses. So that was really helpful to just have that information down here, and I'm sure will be helpful for us when approaching these types of analyses. We also had a number of kind of suggestions of the types of either inputs we should consider or types of CBAs that we should pursue. So we had a really interesting discussion about doing a cost benefit analysis about kind of land use or zoning. So whether you were to zone a parcel of land as, you know, one thing versus something else, kind of what would those impacts be? So that was a really interesting discussion that we had in my third group. We also had an interesting discussion kind of about the difference between an economic impact analysis and a CBA, and the fact that an economic impact analysis is a little bit more broad and it addresses things that are broader in scope, like sea level rise and climate change, versus a CBA is going to be something that's way more project specific. However, we kind of came to the conclusion that both are going to be very helpful. They're kind of targeted to two different audiences. And so Carolyn made a great point where, you know, when she's talking to developers, she kind of wants that information from a CBA where she can say, like, here's the numbers associated with this. But then when kind of painting that broader picture in the context for why that matters, that's kind of where that EIA data might come in. And then I think kind of the final thing we touched on was just place's role in all of this. And so we talked some about how it would be very helpful to develop kind of a beginner's guide for this. Marion touched on that and kind of talking about if you want to do a CBA, like what are the questions that you should be asking? What should you be thinking about? Also kind of collecting case studies that we can, you know, provide for other people. And so doing some sort of webinar series or a video series where we show people like, these are the cost benefit analyses that have been done, and just doing what we do best, which is communicating about these things. So I think that's about it.
Wonderful, thank you. And Marion just added there that there's a virtual training OCM offers called Economic Guidance for Coastal Management Professionals. And it shares the differences between different types of economic analyses. So maybe this is something we could offer to our partners.
I will add that to our Padlet.
Nice. So we've heard sort of big picture and some details about what was in each room. Is there anything else that's occurred to you after you left a room and you wanted to go back and add, or, you know, is there just anything else low-hanging fruit that you'd like to see undertaken by the network? And it doesn't have to be these three actions. Like if there's something from the other ones you think would be kind of easy to grab.
Renee, real quickly, my favorite topic, I think a low-hanging fruit would be to coordinate with the South Florida, Southeast Compact region, you know, maybe establish some kind of a unofficial, you know, agreement or something of that kind.
Yeah. Do you have a specific point of contact?
Yes, I could.
Okay.
I could send that to you.
Yeah, I think that would be a good step to see what kind of lessons learned. And in that same vein, over on the Atlantic side of Florida, actually, we've had some teammates of mine through Florida Sea Grant reach out to see which of the trainings and things that Place has developed that they could apply over there. Obviously tweaking it to make more sense for Atlantic coast issues. So maybe there's a way to kind of bring all this together to think about how do we translate the work from Place across all the rest of Florida a little more effectively.
Right. I'll send you an email and a contact point.
Awesome, thanks.
Well, I'll add to that though, Renee. I think it's the other way around as well. I think it's a two-way street in terms of the coordination activities, both in the Southeast Florida Compact as well as the maybe burgeoning one in Southwest Florida. We talked a bit about one perhaps in the Panhandle area. And so I think there's enough of these that where I think enhanced either with formalized or informalized relationships with them, I think that would be helpful to then for Place to take and maybe, you know, is something like this applicable to Mississippi and Alabama, perhaps, or elsewhere? And then, if so, what's the best way to initiate? What are the lessons learned? What are the pitfalls, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. That's a great point, especially with this conversation around coordination. The best example that we've got right now in the region of sea level rise coordination among disparate groups is what's happening in the Southeast Florida Climate Compact. So I definitely want to learn lessons from that. In South Central, I got to give them a shout out. They've been doing great. And Ken, I saw you come off mute. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, you know, sometimes the pre-election polls don't always pan out how the election goes. I was all excited about saltwater intrusion. And so I guess, not that I'm overly disappointed, but I really thought we were going to, that might have made it into the top 3. I realize that it didn't, but I am concerned that, you know, saltwater intrusion is kind of the underground version of sea level rise. And so I just kind of thought, anyway, I know that we're not ignoring it, Just that I was hoping for one of the top three. That's all.
Absolutely. And maybe what that means is you and Sarah could work together. Sarah Martin, we have several Sarahs on the phone. Other Sarahs, I wasn't volunteering you for things. Sarah with the blue hair has already put in quite a lot of work on understanding where we are on this topic in the Northern Gulf. So maybe you could help spearhead some kind of working group to keep that ball from getting dropped. So even though we have these other priorities, that conversation keeps moving forward. I think you said sure.
Ken, I think if we have a collaboration with the Southeast Compact, there's a lot going on in Southeast Florida, that as you probably know.
Yeah.
I've seen
Jennifer present a lot of cool models and work that they've done on that topic.
Right.
And every time she does, I'm a little jealous. So yeah, being able to translate that up here would be awesome. Okay, so anything else on low-hanging fruit or anything that once you heard the report out on a topic, you want to go back and add? And like Ken said, we're not ignoring the other things. We just need, there's only so much time and energy. And so making sure we're really digging in on the things people really need over the next couple of years. Is there anything else? All right, so what's going to happen next with this information is that the place staff is going to take this and distill it, kind of get it organized, and we're going to develop a work plan and a series of action items. We're going to put out a document that relays all of this and shares it with the whole network so everybody can be aware of and start pursuing these. We'll have sort of a call to action to see who wants to get involved with these different activities moving forward. And, then we'll just start running with this great stuff and seeing what we can move forward on. And that is what this will become. It's going to direct sort of the action of this group and the momentum for the next couple of years. But to make sure that we're actually reaching you with those calls for information and sharing out that kind of stuff, I wanted to take just a quick second to transition and talk about communication. We sort of as a standard, like I said, have used newsletters that come out only 3 times a year because we know that people get overwhelmed with lots of newsletters from lots of places. So we send out a newsletter 3 times a year. We also have our Twitter, which is a more consistent update. It's updated every weekday except for Mondays because those are my days and I forget a lot. And then we also have our website, which is more standard. We update as projects and things happen, but it's sort of just a go-to repository of information and access to training and things like that. So what we wanted to do is we have a poll and there's 2 questions in there. It's one, how are you currently receiving information from us? And moving forward, how do you want to receive information? So go ahead and answer these questions. And if the poll didn't pop up for you, you may have to look down at the bottom where that bar of tools options are and see if you see polling. It may be under the more button. All right, we need just a couple more people to vote. A few more. I'm going to give you a 5-second warning for those last few people. 96%, all but 1%. I'm very excited. That was really great. I don't think I've ever had an online poll that did that well. All right, so y'all should be able to see the results. So it looks like most people get information right now from the newsletter, and that people would like to continue getting information from the newsletter. For those that are the difference between who are now and who would like to in the future, you can sign up for the newsletter on our website. But I see a lot of other here. And so I want to just ask y'all to raise your hands so we can have a conversation about who put other, and what is that? What would you like to see that's not on that list? All right, go ahead, Lauren.
I put other because there wasn't an option to select I don't know. And I think I get the newsletter, but I don't know. So
now if you could get the newsletter, or if you'll get it moving forward, is that good, or do you want something else?
Yeah, I would prefer the newsletter.
Okay. And then Jenna?
I put other because I feel like sometimes if there's something really exciting and timely, an email blast might be more appropriate.
All right, and then real quick before I go to Dave, if y'all like the idea of periodic, I will be judicious with them, but if you like the idea of periodic email blasts, can I see just under the reaction a thumbs up or a thumbs down? You can use the reaction or put your hands up. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Okay. So I don't see any overwhelming thumbs down of people who hate the idea of email blasts. Okay, that's good to know. All right, what you got, Dave?
Yeah, it's email. I mean, that's how I get most of my information from the team, and I've had for many years. I mean, I read the newsletters. I think they should continue to go out, but email's been most effective, and I think it will be in the future for me.
Good to know. Arnaldo?
Yeah, do you guys have a LinkedIn page or a LinkedIn group by any chance?
We do not. In the past, the advisory group voted for us to have a Twitter as our sort of social media engagement. There was a very vehement no to Facebook. And then last time we all met, there was an interest in ResearchGate. And so I put together a group for that and invited a bunch of people, and was sharing research, but it got used not at all. So we went ahead and took that down. So it was one less thing to have to be maintained. It doesn't mean we can't move forward with that, though. We could do, again, thumbs up or thumbs down on generating a LinkedIn page. Who would find that valuable? Or not. Thumbs down is acceptable as well.
How about a sideways thumb? Like, great if it's there, but not essential.
I think that's just abstaining. Oh, is there not a thumbs down reaction option? Oh, Zoom just requires you to be happy. Okay.
There is, you just have to look for it. You have to scroll down.
Interesting. Okay, well, I did not see a lot of thumbs up, but Arnaldo, that doesn't mean that we can't keep a button on that and revisit in the future. All right. Any others? Anyone else have any comments about why they selected other for either of those options? Okay. All right, so moving forward, we'll keep the newsletters, we'll keep Twitter going. We saw some people use it, not a ton, actually only one, but we do get some engagement with other agencies that way. So we'll probably keep it up for now. And the website, I think we kind of just have to have that, but knowing how many people use the newsletter, we'll definitely continue to make sure that's a solid, cohesive project that comes, product that comes out on time. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of proactive policies and other kinds of big picture catalyst conversations. And so where this came from is that, previously people in the network talked about how we need to spend time talking about proactive policies to help implement resilience actions, that when they'd like to do something or implement it, they feel like they're behind the curve on permitting or policies or ordinances or anything like that. And so it was asked that we make some time to discuss this issue, but also make some space to identify other issues like this that are more systemic and big picture. Some things we've already heard mentioned was this idea of implementation. This is just a challenge. We heard from Cynthia and from Carolyn at two totally different stages that, productive or proactive policies on the books are hard to move forward, even though they're there. We've also heard some commentary around the need for coordination, and we have some ideas for how to deal with that. We also had mentioned in the chat, it didn't rise to the top, but this idea of social vulnerability and the idea of how do we engage and make sure that we're considering frontline and marginalized communities across this sphere. And so a few people have brought this up in the past about proactive solutions. And I guess what I'm thinking is that while we may not solve these problems right now, or even come up with specific things to do, if a group that's devoted to talking about sea level rise resilience isn't identifying and scoping out these challenges, I don't know where else that would happen. And so I think the first step to being able to address them is to start talking about them among ourselves. So I'm just going to kind of open up the floor to see if anyone has any thoughts that they'd like to get recognized around some of these bigger picture sort of systemic issues. Hey, Christina. Oh, go ahead, Heidi. I see your hands up.
Yeah, so something that I've been thinking about is how place might inform the conversation at the elected official level. And, you know, we heard yesterday about how helpful it would be if there were some state policies, right? And I think, you know, we've heard that before. I've certainly heard it from Florida communities that they would really, really love it if the state would provide, you know, some state level things related to stormwater, for example. So, and you know, it's tricky because, you know, some of us have to be careful about not getting into an advocacy space, right? But I do think that the science information that place can bring to bear, it would be really great to think about how that can start to inform sort of that level of conversation.
Absolutely. Does anyone have any thoughts or experience on either, like, how did some of this legislation move forward in Florida? How did some of the informing of those state elected officials go? Or conversely, advice on how to navigate that space between educating elected officials without advocating?
So I'll share one thing, but then I want others to jump in too. But I think one thing that's perhaps easy is to invite electeds or their staff, you know, to workshops, right? And I think, you know, we've seen that in the South Florida Compact, that elected officials have come to their leadership summit, right? And I think that's just been invaluable. And maybe place could invite, right, some legislators or staff members to attend events.
And I have a question. You said specifically a leadership summit. So it wasn't, was that less in some of the technical weeds? Was that targeting some of the like bigger picture issues?
It kind of does both. So the compact has and Obi, you can give more detail about this, but from my perspective, that annual meeting is really a nice mix of sort of the high level policy type things, but then also some more in the weeds. I personally wish they would do more in the weeds, and I think they did early on. In recent years, it's tended to be higher level, but yes, it's some of both.
Yeah, Heidi is correct. Early on, it was, you know, somewhat technical. We even had workshops, you know, to train people during the summit, but lately it has been more high level, but it's beneficial because they invite all the politicians. But not only that, but it's also involving private sector in organization. And, you know, the one this year is in December. I think it is a great model for your region to follow, because it's an annual event and it goes from one county to another. And it's full. I mean, there were like 500 people in the last one.
Nice. Okay, so now Christina, then Tina, then Dave is the order I had.
I was just going to add that we being the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, have worked with the National Association of Counties Gulf Caucus. So our last all hands meeting in 2019, that was our last in-person meeting. We had a really great experience with NACO where they co-hosted or co-located their meeting with our all hands meeting. And so we had some really great opportunities, Tina, I see you shaking your head, for cross collaboration and cross conversation. So our GOMA team leads went into some of the NACO sessions and talked about things that the Alliance and partners are working on. And then a lot of the elected officials participated in GOMA team sessions as well. And so that was a really good opportunity for us to engage with those county and parish elected officials. So I would encourage NACO specifically, but then also just if there's other opportunities to have co-located meetings where there's opportunities to cross back and forth, that worked really well for us.
Awesome. Thanks, Christina. And then Tina, what did you want to?
That's what I was going to say. As I was talking about the great relationship between NACO. And of course, I work for county government. There are cities and towns. There's a league of municipalities as well. But those kind of groups where the elected officials are engaged, like with the Gulf Caucus, it's the best opportunity in my view to get interaction.
And I remember at one of those NACO Gulf Caucuses, Hal Needham spoke, and that was really well received. And that was about hurricane flood risk, but yeah, I remember how all that went. Now, does that mean that Christina and Tina, y'all are volunteering to help us make some connections with those groups if need be?
Sure, I can. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thanks. And then Dave?
Yeah, I was going to jump off of Heidi's and Obi's comments about elected officials, and even with our Collier County project, I've been surprised at the level of interest and impressed at the value of not only inviting, but the fact that they were attending the county commissioners in Collier County. And those are pretty technical meetings. I mean, they're not science focused. They're meant for end users, but nonetheless pretty technical. And even just having a county commissioner come in and give opening remarks, and then a well-placed presentation right afterwards before they leave, I think makes a lot of difference. And so I think there's even some low-hanging fruit absent broader cross-regional coordination bodies in Alabama, Mississippi, and elsewhere in the cooperative to some of these, advisory group meetings for specific projects or otherwise. Extend some invitations. Let's put some effort behind it. I think it can be done.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of strategic invitations for sure. Jenna, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Dave, are you speaking about the National Coastal Resilience Fund project?
That's one of our EASL projects. It's similar to N2E2, but doing it in Collier County. But they've had just phenomenal local government support and engagement on that project.
Okay, thanks.
So we've got some good suggestions here on, how we can start moving that big needle, if you will. I have ball in my hand, but it's needle on the idea of what does it take to have things move at the state level to get some of that support that we've been discussing. And it looks like education, I'm going to use that word very explicitly, education, along with strategic invitations to participate in the processes that we have going on locally. In terms of this idea of challenges with implementation, I don't know if there's anything else that, I know Josh, you've talked a little bit in our group this morning about some of those, as well as some of the others in that group, and then Carolyn and Cynthia both touched on it. Is there anything around the issues there that you want, again, it doesn't have to be solving it. If you just want to characterize it, get it documented, I imagine it in some way we're going to start to communicate these issues to make people aware of them. So is there anything around the idea of implementing the proactive policies that we need to start to capture or think about?
As far as implementing policies, ultimately, I think that's going to be done by your local elected officials, and just having honest conversations with them. At the end of the day, we can only give them so much information, and if they're kind of unwilling to steer the ship in any one direction, it's always going to kind of founder, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just more of what we've been talking about, providing those talking points and just continuing to drive them home, but finding opportunities to give real examples. So knowing if there's a certain policy that we're trying to impress upon them is important, be sure that if there is a similar project that is working under that policy, that we know about it so I can bring it to their attention as a real life example.
All right. Are there any other big picture, big challenge, maybe things from the conversations about if you had a magic wand, what you'd like to see happen, that you want to make sure that we don't miss and that we characterize? Will, I see you came off mute.
Renee, one thing I would mention, in a state like Alabama, where your coastal area is 2 counties out of 67, making headway in state government sometimes can be challenging because you have to make what you're proposing relevant to a very large population base that doesn't have a lot of coastal connection. And so there's got to be some thought of how do you make suggestions broad enough that they are fitting into something that has a chance of being passed as legislation that will benefit your coastal area, but also benefit the rest of the state. So I think there's definitely some real thinking to be done there about how you best phrase things and how you approach that when you're looking at a very small legislative delegation compared to the rest of the state.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. And I think Mississippi also has that. I think that is one big differentiator between Alabama and Mississippi and the portion of our geography that's in Florida.
I agree. We have 3, but it's no better. So.
And so Obey, I saw your hand went up, and then after Obey, we'll do Heidi. Obey, if you're talking, you're muted.
Sorry, this is a little different. An idea that we didn't discuss, we just finished an indicator set, climate indicator set for the Southeast, and we published that, and there's a lot of interest on that across the state. It might be something that you could think about, developing an indicator set that's easily understandable by not only the politicians, but also the public. That might be useful.
Yeah, can you send a link to that?
Yeah,
it was published. Okay.
I could.
Because one of the things that has happened in the past from these conversations, we've heard from many of the people in this meeting and past meetings that often they're the only champion for these issues. And so getting out there and helping residents understand and have an educated voice and a direction to go with that information. So we do have a project lined up to do more of that. So I think, if you can share that, we are definitely designing what that kind of engagement looks like right now.
Okay, I will. Thanks.
Yeah, Heidi.
Renee, I feel like this must have come up already, but I'm not sure it has, which is just the on the horizon need to communicate the new sea level rise scenarios coming out in the new tech report at the end of the year. And, we didn't prioritize outreach and communication of sea level rise science and issues, right? But I know that PLACE will be, and is already in the thick of, right, trying to help with, translating that information, and we'll be helping to get that out across the Gulf and beyond, right? So I think it's just, I want to acknowledge for the whole group, right, that PLACE is going to have to put some energy, right, and time and resources towards explaining that update when it comes.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up, Heidi, because I don't think it has come up yet. And just for everybody on this call to know, The scenarios are updating this year. So those suite et al. Scenarios are going to have a new version of that at the end of this calendar year. And like Heidi said, we are involved in those conversations and trying really hard to make sure that we can all hit the ground running with information, talking points, communication materials associated with that. Jim, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, and playing off of that, I think there's a good bit of just sort of cross effort coordination that this group can or that the place can serve, because you're going to have, you've got the IPCC stuff that just came out, this work coming out at the end of the year. You've also got that NAS Gulf Research Program RFP that's going to be, that I think is either closing or just closed, and they'll be making a decision in the next couple months about who they're going to give an award to. And there's somewhat of an assumed consistency between those disparate efforts, but at the same time, I don't know that there is actually a guarantee or an expectation that even it should be consistent. The work that NAS, for instance, is going to fund, could deviate some from some of like the revised scenarios that come out at the end of the year, and so I think it's probably just behooves this group to think about longer term coordination with the various players that are sort of all coming in attacking the same issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one thing actually that's been floated among some of the engagement people in the sea level rise resilience sphere nationally is the idea of a training in early spring that just does what you described, that takes the IPCC and takes the NAS research that's coming and takes the new scenarios and really actively deliver that and provide some information about how they're different, how they're the same, how to use them moving forward, and then also some training on tools to take the next step. So maybe just as a quick check, thumbs up if people would be like willing to put some time in attending a meeting like that. Thumbs are going up. Okay.
Well, and it that may be also something that's worth thinking about of the other things, for instance, that are planned for the spring, and I'm thinking about the Gulf Conference that's scheduled for April, and the idea that I guess we're landing on for that follow-up Coastal and Screen Research Federation funded workshop on sea level rise that actually is sort of playing off of that 2018 workshop. That may be an opportunity. I think the important point I guess I'm trying to relay is I think if we start trying to map some of those out, it's going to be, it's sea level rise, as we've seen over the years, is a moving target, right? And so it's probably trying to map out that those opportunities for continued conversation, through time as that target moves, I think would be a really valuable thing for, maybe this group to take a good bit of leadership on.
Yeah, and I think that aligns well with some of the suggestions we heard about place organizing panels and conversations at these kinds of standing meetings as well.
Yeah.
Oh, but you have your hand, is that still up, or did you put it back up?
No, I need to put that back down. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. I just wanted to check and make sure. So we've had some great conversation here. Just to kind of recap, we highlighted the need to begin engaging and educating the elected officials as well, particularly at the state level, but also the same elected individuals at the county level, getting them engaged, both on the technical side, but also some of those higher level big picture things. We've also talked about specific mechanisms to do that with standing groups like NAGO and the League of Cities, along with some others, also leveraging partnerships that like GOMA has already established. Some other things we talked about around implementation, we really need to dig in on talking points and strategic examples to complement those policies to help demonstrate, look, this is how it can be done. So when there is resistance or challenges, the elected officials have things in their back pockets along with the people trying to work with the developers. Another point was thinking about, as we do this, both in Mississippi and Alabama, unlike Florida, there isn't this huge statewide emphasis on coastal issues. And so making sure that our language, our talking points, our education helps to frame up why it matters to everybody in those states and not just the people in those 5 coastal counties. And then some other things that we've touched on here are just really making sure that we are taking an active role in helping to consolidate and to disseminate that information as more sea level rise science comes out, particularly around the scenarios, but also I think this holds true across a variety of sea level rise science. There's so much happening out there and there's so much going on. And then there was a good example from Obey of maybe the climate indicators and other types of things we may look into to help not just with the elected officials, but also thinking about residents. Is there anything else? I don't feel like, you know, any of us get a chance to really sit down and have these conversations with each other. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before we wrap up for the day? All right. Thank you all for such an amazing conversation. I mean, I get to think about sea level rise resilience all the time, so it's fun to have 40 people to talk about this with instead of just the 4 who are forced to share office space with me. I'm sure they appreciate it too. So the next thing I'd like to do is just kind of reflect on how much we've done in the past 2 days. We got caught up on this new program and what it's doing. We're able to wrap our heads around just a few of the many tools that are out there and what we can be using to help move sea level rise resilience forward. We had some excellent case studies that really highlighted both progress forward, what it looks like, some of those road bumps and lessons learned from those bumps, and then also understanding what next steps are, how this whole process moves forward. We reviewed and added to the list of gaps and needs, helping to further clarify and crystallize, and that information, not only are we going to share it with our network, but hopefully send that out to funders and other groups who maybe can tackle some of those issues as well. They were prioritized so our specific network knows among those many needs where we want to go and what we want to spend some time on in the next 2 years. And we characterized some really great information from a big picture perspective of what we need to be doing for sea level rise resilience in the region to make sure that all the things we do for project level and all these little things to address gaps and needs to take those bites are moving forward the whole overall thing for a safer, more resilient coastline. So with that, we do have an evaluation. Fondy's going to drop it in the chat. It's really critical for us, for y'all to answer these questions. I don't want to, waste everybody's 2 days. So when we inevitably get together again, I want to make sure we're doing it well. So please take just a few minutes. I'm going to just stay here. We'll all stay here, take 5 minutes to go answer that survey really quickly. And then, all right. So it's been a couple more minutes. We're not going to close the survey on y'all. If you're not done, that's okay. Just keep it rolling. But I wanted to let you know, again, next steps. We are going to synthesize a workshop report from this effort. We're also going to put out explicitly the updated gaps and needs as sort of a standalone. And again, we'll have the newsletter coming out in September that'll highlight the priorities. Like I said, I'll also be reaching out to see who has an interest in engaging on some of these priorities moving forward, so we can kind of get a few teams together so we can start looking for funding opportunities if necessary, working groups, things like that, as we really dig into these actions that were listed. One more thing I wanted to just quickly point out is that Carrie Schaefer, who's been an incredible help to Place over the last year, including getting it set up and making sure that Place went forward strongly as they got started, is going to be leaving us. So a big round of applause to Carrie. We wish her good luck moving forward. And also a big thank you, because this workshop would not have happened without her. So thanks again for the evals. Make sure you submit them. I don't know, Todd, if you want to just close us out with anything before we head out.
No, I think the Jeopardy music was sufficient.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for your time and your energy and your wonderful brain power and thoughts. Don't forget to hit submit on the evals, and y'all will be hearing from us very soon. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.